This is the Mind Body Detox Podcast, where we discuss all things integrative health and wellness, interviewing folks from all over the world, sharing insights and wisdom for how to live a healthier life in mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back, everyone, to the Mind Body Detox Podcast. I'm your host, Mind Body Medium Kara Lovehart, and we are doing our Halloween episode for the year, and we're going to be talking about ghosts and spirits as teachers, okay? So we're going to talk to Rissa Miller, so we're bringing her back on the show because she is a ghost storyteller and historian and all the other things, herbalist, healer, seer, and of course, she is the perfect person I wanted to talk to about this specific topic. So we want to talk about understanding spirits and how we help them heal and how we help them cross over. So that is going to be what we're talking about today. So let's bring Miss Rissa on and chat about her background, at least in this particular area, because I don't think we touched on this last time. Hi, Rissa.
I don't think we did. Hi, Kara. It's great to see you.
So I want to know, just first off, how did you get involved? Like, what drew you to storytelling in the first place?
So what drew me to storytelling? Okay. Going back in my brain, I think it was my dad telling stories. So when I was a little girl, I remember it wasn't always just at Halloween, but definitely for Halloween, there was a tradition that after trick or treat, my mom made the most amazing pot of vegetable soup, and we would put it in a thermos and go out and drive around allegedly haunted sites, and Dad would tell stories. And I loved this tradition my whole childhood. I loved it through being a teenager, believe it or not. I didn't think it was dumb by the time I got to be a teenager. And I wish he would still do it, but he doesn't anymore. I guess the storytelling torch has passed on to me.
That's amazing. Well, then when did you start getting involved? You're like, you know what? I want to do ghost tours and I want to do storytelling and understand the history here. And then, of course, you as an intuitive, sensitive person, sensing the spirits too. Tell me about that.
So growing up in my family, ghosts were never a taboo subject. There was always an acknowledgement that there was a spirit world. There was always an acknowledgement that anything is possible. And there was never any, you must not ever speak about ghosts. Because as a little girl, I did see ghosts. And my most marked memory of it happened in York, England. I was 8 years old. My parents took me along so that I could see the other York, the original York, where the York that you and I live in was named after. And we were in a place called Marmaduke's. It was a pasta restaurant, Italian. And I went upstairs to use the restroom, and I saw a teenage boy in full spectral form. The thing that surprised me wasn't that I saw him. It was how incredibly sad he was, and the fact that I could feel his sadness. I went downstairs to get my mom because I said, there's a spirit boy upstairs that needs help. And I didn't know how to help him. I was a child myself. And I took her back up and he was gone. And so we went downstairs and my mom said, I think there might have been a teenage boy or perhaps a ghost. And the server who was with us that evening said, yes, that's Marmaduke, that we named the restaurant after him. He died here in the 1600s. So I found out later his name was Marmaduke Buckle, and he was a special needs person. He had both physical and emotional challenges in the 1600s, and people, instead of being compassionate, assumed he was practicing witchcraft, which is, of course, under the reign of King James, what people thought. So I understand all this now, but at the time it was a lot to take in. And he committed suicide in that room. So his spirit was stuck in that space. There are different kinds of ghosts. I'm sure you know this, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but there are interactives, and there are intelligent ghosts, and then there are repetitives that are not interactive. And he was a repetitive. So his pain was sort of left like a scar on that space. Yeah. And the server explained that the rest of that scene, that as it plays out, would be that he would then have gone up on the chair and kicked it down when he hanged himself. I didn't see that. And I'm actually quite glad as an 8-year-old I didn't witness that because it was just enough to make me interested and to inspire my thought process of why did this ghost appear? What did he want? What did he need? Why was he stuck in this place? And I do think now that he was not an intelligent spirit. I think he was simply a scar on that place where he had suffered so deeply during his life.
Yeah. I love that But I love that we can talk about this because, my background growing up seeing spirits and then, putting in hospitals medications like something's wrong with you. It wasn't until later that I started to understand, yes, these things are real. Yes, these things have different types of qualities. And a lot of it is this sadness. There's these stuck, unfinished business kind of things. And I knew that when I first was having these experiences, they were scary because there was no one to explain it to me. We luckily, with the age of the internet and people like yourself, have a lot more opportunities to learn more about these things because we only see these dramatized versions of horror movies and things that really creates a lot of fear. So that's what we wanted to talk about, that you and I both believe that ghosts are something to be understood and not to be feared. So do you have any experiences, or I should say thoughts on why they exist and what maybe they represent?
So nobody knows that answer completely. I can only offer you an opinion because science has not yet reached a place where we can prove that there's a soul, that we can prove that there is such a thing as a spirit. And, we also didn't used to have science that could explain weather, but here we are, and we do understand that now. I believe that eventually science will catch up with what we know intuitively. This is always how it works. Science just takes longer because you have to be able to prove and repeat things. That said, why do they exist? So I feel like within the realm of ghosts, I'm going to talk mostly about the intelligent spirits, the ones that interact. I think kind of already touched on the repetitives, the ones that are sort of like a scar on time. They are an emotional outcry from an experience. And now they can actually be positive experiences too. I have heard of repetitive residuals that are positive, like from a happy moment. Anytime there's that big outpouring of a feeling, there's the energy, right? The energy comes from our emotion. It can leave a residual spirit. It doesn't even have to be a person who's passed. A living person can leave a residual.
This is exactly what I tell people when they come into their homes and we're doing, sometimes they want us to work with spirits, but I'm like, it's not just spirits. Everything is consciousness, whether it had a soul or a life form. It's like, how much energy did you put into that stuffed animal over there? Or where did you fight in this kitchen? Like, it's an energetic imprint. And I agree that the more heightened or extravagant the emotion, the more of an imprint it makes, whether it's a happy, good, joyful experience or sad or fearful or angry. So
I can walk into a house and say that this place was loved. Not necessarily by how it looks, but by how it feels. And I can walk into other places and go, oh, there was heartbreak here. Like you can just feel the residual energies from it, whether or not they take the form of like the video replay of a residual spirit, or it's just in the air. And absolutely those things. I don't even think you have to be all that sensitive to feel that. Because a lot of people can sense that in a space. And that's the one whole category of residuals. But when we're talking about an intelligent spirit that will interact with you, that's a really different experience. And that is where people get scared because there's not a lot of understanding. And there's people like, Stephen King that have made us scared. And, there's a place for entertainment. I love a scary movie. I love a scary book. But I also understand that those are entertainment. And I'm not saying that there aren't scary spirits out there. There are. There are probably more scary living people out there. There's a great line in Beetlejuice, never trust the living. I'm right there. I'm much more scared of the living than I am of the dead. So for the record, that's where I stand on that. If somebody is on my tour or they're asking me about it and they're like, I'm really scared if a ghost might get me, I'm like, you should be a lot more scared driving on the highway. There are not a lot of police reports out there of, death by ghosts. Very few. Very few. So I'm not saying that there's no such thing. I'm just saying it is incredibly rare. You are more likely to get hit by lightning statistically. So all of that said, hang on one second. All of that said, I think interactive spirits are amazing because some of them don't know why they're here. Some of them are here for a specific reason, and some of them simply don't want to leave. They're in a place that they love. I was downtown today at the Appel Center this morning for a tour, which Yorkers might remember as the Strand Capital. Anybody else in the world, it's the Appel Center. And they have an interactive ghost there they call the stagehand. And he loves it there. he still takes care of the place. It is his home. He worked there during his life. He's still taking care of it now. He is one of the best kinds of interactive, intelligent spirits to have because he never left his work. He was passionate about that place, and he continues to be passionate about it long after his death. One of the reasons I was there is we were trying to figure out who he was. We were going backwards through time, going like when, because he smokes a cigar. When was it allowed that people could smoke in the Appel Center? He also sometimes smells like whiskey. When could staff drink? When would the stagehands have communicated with whistles versus light? Because nowadays they use light or electronic signals. But historically, they whistled backstage to change the set or any number of other things. When did all of that change specifically there? Not just like, it probably changed much sooner in London and New York. But when did it filter down here that those technological changes happen? So it's a research project in process, trying to figure out who he was. And it's obvious why he's there. There's no mystery. He was happy there, and he still takes care of the place. I have had reports from a cleanup crew that say sometimes he appears to be supervising to make sure they're doing a good job. Sometimes they actually hear him sweeping when they're trying to clean as well, because he wants to take care of this place that he loved. So in the case of this particular intelligent spirit, I think that he's made a choice to stay. I don't know who he was. I wish I knew his name or whether or not he had a family or it was a single person. And maybe that's why he loved the place so much. It was his home. But it does not appear to be a tragedy. I can't confirm that, but it doesn't appear that way. It appears to be a choice to linger in this realm. Now, there are others that their stories are tragic. And when I get into that, unfortunately, this comes into the realm of a lot of women's stories. A lot of the female hauntings are women that had no agency during their lifetime. And it is kind of only in death that they get their voice. I hate to say that, but it's just case after case after case, this appears to be true. So the female hauntings are often tragic deaths, murders, accidents, rape, all of the horrible things that you would imagine would be the worst possible outcome. A lot of the female ghost stories link to that kind of a death. And why are they still here? Perhaps they want their story told. Perhaps they want justice. They don't all speak. Mm-hmm. Some appear. Some have a presence, but don't ever interact. I know that you're a medium, so maybe you would be able to ascertain answers like that other people can't. I have worked with mediums who've been able to get some information from some of the various hauntings that I tell their stories. And one medium I worked with said that the ghost was so happy to have her name remembered and her story told that she feels more peaceful now that other people are learning what happened in her lifetime. There's another story I tell about a man who was gay during his lifetime, and his spirit lingers in the building where he either lived or worked. It's now a bookstore. It's bound books, but it's been many things over time. There have been apartments there. There have been other stores. There have been restaurants. So I can't figure out, even with the help of a medium, I couldn't figure out when he was alive. I'm going to say probably pre-1960s, but I mean, homophobia has existed for a long time, so it could have been any number of years. But he gives off a feeling of fear and coldness. But when I got there with the medium, we both immediately said, he's not angry, he's scared and lost. And he's looking for where he belongs. Yeah. So one of the things that the owners of this bookstore have said, like, we want him to know he's welcome. Like, they actually said to the medium, can you tell him he's welcome here, that everybody's welcome here, and he doesn't have to stay in the back hallway by the bathroom, that he could come out and hang out in the bookstore, he could read a book, whatever he wants to do, we're totally open to it. He's home now. He can stay with us. And the medium's like, he heard you.
Yeah.
He heard you.
Yeah. I love that. I think that what you're saying, all cases of why spirits stick around it's very diverse as the personalities of the spirits that are still with us. And it's different because there's a difference between a ghost, a haunting, an earthbound spirit is what I call. They have a heavier presence. It's more palpable. It's more sensible to the five senses. Anyone that's crossed over or we can say energies that are lighter, that are not as dense in this third dimensional plane, like angelic beings or people who have crossed, our loved ones, animals. Those feel completely different to me as a medium when connecting with them. But they do all have different reasons for staying behind. And I feel overarching, my personal opinion is that so many of us in this human form, we've come here to learn, to experience, and grow our consciousness. And when we have things that hang us up, whether we're in physical form, we learn growth lessons through relationships, challenges. The challenges that seem to be the common thing for all of us is, how do we let go and how do we learn to love more? And even in death, without a body, if there's people that can come in the living, still in the flesh, into your space as a spirit, you've had a tragedy or whatever, and their living experience, living vicariously through watching them in their home, experiencing the ups and downs. Maybe that person lost a child and never had a child when they were born, but then the home and the family they're living in as a spirit, they have a family and a child, and they can almost be in that space and play with that child or help watch and guide that child. It helps to create a completion sometimes for a spirit for when it is time, or when they do decide they want to cross over and disperse. So that's just my own experience. But I know I've experienced a lot of misconceptions people have about ghosts, but I'd love to see what your thoughts are, and what do the common things people say to you that you're like, no, that's not really true.
So the most common misconception is that ghosts are something to be afraid of. And while I would put an asterisk on that and say occasionally that's true, or there's some things out there that I don't think are the same as ghosts, asterisk, most of the time they're trying to communicate. They want you to know they're there. So like the rappings, the loud sigh in the room, your dog or cat staring at the space where there is no one and they're acting like there's somebody there, or even interacting with something that you can't see. Horses do it too. You know what? I'm willing to bet all animals do it. Those are just the three I have experience with. So all of these kinds of things are pretty much a ghost or an earthbound spirit interacting with you in the space that you're sharing. Like, you are indeed sharing a space. If you have something like this in your home, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. You can cooperate and learn from each other. That has been my number one experience. I have interacted many times with a ghost that has helped me find lost things. Very good at it. They're really good at that. I have someone who came to me and she was convinced there was a spirit. I said, you know what? Leave out, for whatever reason, this popped into mind. I said, leave out a pencil because they're lighter and a piece of paper. And sure enough, in the morning, she lived alone. She got a really hard to read message, and it said, "Love, Dad." It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a scary haunting. It was her Passover father there to either make peace, say goodbye, something. She never heard from him again after that interaction. He passed through, like he passed across. So there have been so many stories that I've been witness to where they just are trying to communicate with you for some reason. It could be someone that you know, an ancestor, someone who lived in your house before. There's a great story in downtown New York about a ghost that was trying to point out a leak in the plumbing. And at first they were very scared. They were like, oh my gosh, there's a ghost here. And then finally he kept appearing near this wall, this spectral form. And finally, they realized that he was pointing out there was a leak and it was getting really bad. And he was trying to save the building. With a little research and digging, I found out he was one of the original bricklayers in the early 1900s who built the space. He died right after the building was made, and it was a huge source of pride for him. He wanted them to fix it.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
It's the communication. I mean, honestly, as humans, we're not the best at communication. Like, we struggle to communicate clearly with each other. We struggle to communicate with our animals. But you know what? These after death, it doesn't change.
No.
There's still this lack of communication, lack of understanding, and lack of compassion. And I think that most of the time, like I said, asterisk, there are a few exceptions. Most of the time, that is what is going on.
I had that same experience with one of the spirits that lives on our property, Stuart, that you've gotten to meet, with a leak in our basement. And he was very adamant. And I kept feeling like, what's going on? I'm busy. And I remember I pushed my push mower into the basement, and I kept seeing this figure and like this sense of strong pulling and magnetic, like almost like a yelling. And it was startling me. I'm like, what do you want? Because I was like, I have to go do things. And I went back. I was like, oh, I see. The boiler's leaking. Okay, thank you. So that's definitely the case with a lot of the helper spirits. But you're right that communication, it doesn't change. So even as a medium, for those who have crossed over, if they weren't the best communicators in life, it's harder to connect with them. So usually I ask their guides and get kind of higher source to communicate for them if they still are just showing up in their own personalities, that they were not going to be the best at communicating, or they were maybe someone that didn't talk about their feelings, like that kind of thing. But it still is nice because they'll identify their personality and characteristics in that way, but doesn't always change. So are you interested in sharing with us how you balance historical accuracy when there's some mysterious factors around some of these elements in these ghost stories?
Absolutely. So I'm a passionate researcher. I do have a background in journalism and in literally doing research, studied history. And I think that putting these stories, especially some of the older ones, into the context of their time and understanding more about the life of the person whose story we're telling really not only is good for the spirit itself, but also for the living to understand A, the history, and B, that human beings don't change that much. A lot of the ghost stories I tell talk about, for example, lost love. Lost love is something that everybody experiences at least once during their lifetime, probably. Even if it's like the loss of a pet, you experience the loss of something or someone, some soul that you love at some point. And so many ghost stories revolve around lost love. So many ghosts are waiting for their love to come back, whether that was a man gone for war or a woman who went out to run an errand and never came home. A lot of times these spirits wait and they are still hoping for their love to come back. It happens with children too, which is especially sad. There is a ghost I encountered where he was angry at being deserted, and his presence took up a lot of space in this person's home. A huge amount of negative, weighty space. Like literally, the higher you went in the house, you felt like your body was getting heavier and being pushed down. And it turned out to be a child whose mother died, and he had also died in an accident and was waiting for her to come back. And she was never coming back. She had successfully crossed over. He hadn't. And he was still in the family home waiting. And when I went in with a medium, he reported that the young man was still waiting for mom to come home because there was no dinner. And he didn't know when they were going to go to the baseball game. And, the media was trying to communicate, like, she's already passed through. It's time for you to consider the same or get out of this house. It's like, there's a baseball stadium now. You could go watch baseball yourself anytime. He was like, he was trying to give the spirit options, but the spirit was very stuck. And, I think that's something a lot of people can relate to in their living time as well. The feeling of stuckness that a lot of the ghosts also experience.
Yeah, it's no different. I feel like sometimes I'm like a medium psychologist for some of the spirits. And I'm not trained in psychology for the living, but when it comes to the dead, hey, what are the ethical boundaries of working with someone who's crossed over when you're not licensed as it? But it's really true. There's been multiple times where I've had to help. It's really about helping people come to resolution and surrender and letting go. And it is with elements of mediumship. It's communicating via charades. It's sending messages, sending pictures, sending emotions, talking out loud, using the voice. It's using the consciousness and guides and helpers to help that person move on. And a lot of times that is, I just feel like it's an intervention sometimes.
Well, and you were asking about the history component. The history component is the grind of this. Yeah. It is sitting for hours in a research library, looking through stacks and stacks of paper for a needle in a haystack. It is looking on obituary after obituary after obituary, wondering, like, this name that a medium got, A, is it even correct? B, was it a nickname? Like a name, there's a ghost in New York named Jojo. Was she Joanna? Was she Josephine? Was she neither of those? I did eventually find her and she was Joanna, but I didn't know even within the context of that. Joanna, is there an E? Is there no E? Like, you just spend hours and hours doing the historical research, trying to figure out who was this person? What was their life like? And then you could finally puzzle piece their story together to a complete picture of life.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that so much, especially when you have both ends, that you are sensitive in your nature to be able to pick up and work with other mediums too, and to get the clear picture from the spiritual side and then the historical side. I think that's fantastic. So, do you notice any patterns or differences in ghost stories from different regions when you're traveling? And how are these different for like cultural, historical backgrounds in particular areas? You know, like Gettysburg is one we all know about. So, tell me, because I know places feel different. Everywhere has a different energetic frequency. And so that's going to affect and of course, the background, the history, the culture of that area. But, the ley lines, there's a lot of aspects to that. So how's that for you when it comes to the differences in the stories?
So I feel like ghost stories always run along similar themes. They are always intelligent spirits again. Um, they always run along similar themes. There's a reason they're here. Is probably something they loved and or hated. Occasionally, you get that too. But as someone who wants justice, you do find those places. I think all places can hold a spirit. Some places are more prone to holding a spirit. Somewhere there was a war, like Gettysburg or any number of other places, Valley Forge. There was more death. There was more loss. There's just simply going to be more stuff. But there's been death everywhere. And there's probably not an inch of this earth that hasn't had a creature or a human being die on it. Period. End of story. One of the most interesting questions I've ever fielded was, why don't I see ghosts of dinosaurs? And I was like, that is such a good question, because there are ghosts of animals and there are ghosts dating back to the maybe 1400s that people report. Why aren't there ghosts of dinosaurs? I don't have a good answer for that question. I don't know anybody that's ever seen one. I've never taken a report of one, and no other researcher I know has ever gotten one. Why are those souls gone and others aren't? I can't even explain it.
I have a hypothesis. This is just a hypothesis. So in nature in its natural form grows, evolves, it lives, it breeds, all the things sleeps. And then it naturally lets go. When a bird or an animal gets in a fight, most of the time, or they're upset, they let go. And so the lower evolved parts of the brain that we still have, the reptilian brain, that's the primal nature. It doesn't have this higher memory that holds on to things. It's more reactive in the moment, always. So it's easier to let go in the moment, that the reptile, the alligator, it gets its food, or the dinosaur, and then it lets go. It's not until we had the higher evolved parts of the brain, the mammalian brain, and this whole sense of, we see more animals even, that when they get in trauma, you rescue an animal from the shelter, they have a part of the brain that remembers in a deeper way. And it's not just in this more of like a primal eat, sleep, drink, mate. And it's more connection. And they remember through these social connections. That's what the mammalian brain does. And so that's where, as humans, that's where we get into, we could say, the dis-ease or the sickness of not letting go, the emotional pain that we hold on to because we have memory and history, and we process time. And I think that's different. When you have an animal that doesn't do that, it may not residually haunt or stick around. That's my hypothesis. So I'd love to hear people's thoughts on that. Actually, any of the listeners, I really would, but that's my hypothesis.
I think that's actually a really strong hypothesis. I like it. It works for me.
Thank you. So we're talking about getting rid of the fear around ghosts in general today, but we know that people talk about bad ghosts or bad spirits. And really, are they bad people that need healing? What do you see as far as the processing for your work when you've worked with people who are helping spirits cross over? And do you think there's a role that we do help as humans to help some of the spirits move onward?
Yes, and there's several answers to that question. First, just like there are people in this world who are different from most of us and that they don't process information in the same way. So we label them bad or evil or troubled. That's real. Those things really happen. And I would say that many of them could be helped. And then I have a psychologist friend I talked to about this very thing. And she said, not all of them can be helped. Sometimes their brain chemistry is just different. And I think that the spirit world sees that too. So when those souls cross over, if they don't find peace, they could stick around. Now, you will definitely find what we call these malevolent spirits hanging out in particular places, maybe where they died, or a lot of times around dark places where they suffered, like prisons. So, a great example would be Eastern Penn in Philadelphia. A lot of people report what they call shadow people there. Shadow people are a very specific kind of ghost, and they are usually considered a dark entity. They are usually considered an entity that doesn't necessarily mean you well. And I have encountered one shadow person in my life. I was a child at the time. I do remember it fairly well. It was definitely not a dream. And interestingly, what I have collected stories of other shadow people throughout this town. So back to Eastern Penn, around places like prisons or asylums, you find a lot of this shadow people activity. I don't know what they are. I can't explain it to you. I can tell you what it looked like when I saw it. It was a very tall, dark figure. It did not have on a hat. Some people report that they wear a hat. I didn't see that. I didn't see any glowing red eyes or anything like that. That sounds a little bit sensational to me. But if somebody is listening and that's what they saw, then you know what you saw. That's just not what I saw. What I saw had no face, but it did have a very bad feeling around it. And it could communicate with me without a mouth, without a face. And I remember, like, I was a kid, I was very precocious. I guess that hasn't changed. But I was kind of like, no, why would I come with you? Like, what do you want? And it finally gave up on me and pushed on. So whatever it wanted, I never knew, but I knew it could somehow communicate with me. That said, other people have very different interactions with shadow people that are very scary. And like I said, asterisk, there are some dark spirits out there. This is an example of that. Shadow people are dark spirits, literally dark spirits. However, there are other ghosts that do manifest with a dark mist around them. That doesn't make them shadow people. That's just sometimes it's just how the light hits, or whatever else. So I don't want to create a panicky fear around dark, shadowy figures. Shadow people are a specific thing. And I am pretty sure that if you see one, you will absolutely know what you're looking at.
Yep.
They are not stuck to a place, as far as I know. They are quite mobile and they can go where they want, but they are attracted to negative energy. So somewhere where there is suffering, stress, loss, pain, there's just going to be more of them around. Lots of arguments and fighting, they'll show up. It's almost like they eat bad energy. I don't know. That doesn't make sense, but it's the only way I can think of to describe it. Does that make sense to you? It's like that's what they long for. It's what they want.
Yep.
I don't know what they are. I can't explain them away, but I have collected lots of stories from people who witness them, and it is an alarming experience versus a regular earthbound spirit or ghost. It feels different. It feels very different. Like a cold spot in a room doesn't scare me. A shadow person is something I don't want to encounter.
Yeah. And so that's something, I think that's why people, if they had experiences like that or had someone or heard someone or there's stories or there's movies about things like that, I think that's where ghosts get a bad rap. Because, when it comes to my personal opinion and experience with those types of things, is I see everything in life is an opportunity for learning, growth, setting boundaries, greater expansion of love. And in a universe where all things are welcome, there's all the power of choice to choose, love or fear. When you are in a specific headspace, even in your waking life, you will be more optimistic. You will have more optimistic family members. You won't be attracted to be around friends or family that are kind of in this negative space. You'll kind of be like, I don't know about that anymore. But I think that if you want to label the shadow people in that, with that term, I do think it's actually more so a sense of the consciousness of fear, anger, hate, rage personified. And if we want to believe it as actually an entity, we could say that. But I think entity, when people are afraid of that word a lot of times, it has some sort of weird connotation. I'm like, can you just look at it all as collective consciousness, aspects of the self? Can you look at it and it's hard when you only identified as who you are in this lifetime, what your name is, what your job is, your gender, that kind of thing. But I think throughout my journey in expanding consciousness and connecting with other people who are really in that space too, we start to see things beyond linear patterns, linearity. It's linear. Can you say the word for me? Linearity. Yeah. Can we move beyond that? And I think it's more so these are expressions of consciousness. You know, you have angelic beings and you have beings that aren't, but there's always a power of choice. I think the fear comes where we think, maybe I don't have a choice, or maybe they're going to take over my body or whatever. And I think that it is this matter of giving you a potential to say, I'm not going to choose that. No. And I do see that those types of things tend to, like you said, manifest or create themselves to be known around negative energy, around sadness, around fear, around sorrow, despair. And I think that's why we do have sometimes crossover between mental health issues and influence from the energies around us. But we're also making a choice to call those in or allow those things to be in our space. Fear is food. So like, that's why when we always teach people, when you're working with spiritual energy or you have things in your space, if you're afraid of it, you're causing more food or more magnetic attraction or allowing it to be in that space vibrationally. So I think that just, I like that you're, differentiating ghosts between these shadow people, because I think that that's like, first of all, people out there listening would be like, I never heard of that. Oh my God, that's so scary. Like, no, it's just another aspect of creation. It's another aspect of life. So if you can look at it like that, as part of the collective consciousness or unconsciousness, whether it's not actually an entity, maybe it's a projection of the self or the collective self, because that's also another thing I've noticed with people. They have extensions of themselves, personalities, parts of themselves that kind of hang around their negative self, their inner teenager, these different selves that you could say are personified in an energetic form. So why not with the collective, us as humans, all the things that we get totally raged for, the primal side of ourselves, we don't, the part of us that could kill these parts of ourselves. What if those things are just, there's no place for it to be inside of us consciously? Because I think a lot of us don't have the ability to say, if you would have those dark thoughts or emotions, to be able to be present with them and say, that's not actually who I am, but that's an aspect of the collective. I think these things need a place to play out and express themselves as a part of the collective spectrum of light, dark, good, bad, if we want to label it that. I don't think we should, but that's what we do. So I hope that makes sense. I hope I didn't go off on too much on a tangent there, but I just feel passionate about the differentiating there.
And, I'll reflect back on my own story. Even as a child, I knew to say no. I knew to say no to that shadow person. And I would do the same thing today. And I feel as though I could very calmly walk away from that kind of an interaction.
Yeah.
So, but I have encountered many other kinds of energy, of spirits, and I don't find them scary. Most of the time, I feel their sadness and loss.
Yeah.
And I feel like fear is such a staticky emotion. When it's active, you don't perceive what's actually going on. You throw a veil over it of fear. And you tend to see the worst. Or imagine the worst. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times when you're dealing with something like the energy of a ghost, it is not actually bad. It is simply a lost soul that wants to be heard or wants to be understood, or literally is just lost. And it's just as scared as you. So it kind of brings, as I've learned that over the years, I have a lot more compassion and a lot more discernment. For trusting, like, what do I feel when I walk into a space? Like when I was describing the ghost at Bound Books, it wasn't scary at all. It was sad. Yeah. It was a lost soul, like clinging on to a space where it had been and looking for a place to belong. And I would love for that soul to find peace, whether it's in the bookstore or elsewhere in the building, whatever. I wish that he would feel safe for the first time.
Yeah. It's so beautiful to have that compassion, Rissa. Like, I think that's a beautiful perspective, that it would be really beautiful if all of humanity could adopt that, not only for each other, like just to really realize that we're all human and we all have things that we go through, and then also to apply that to the spirit world so we can have less fear around them as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about maybe a meaningful encounter or a story where a ghost has moved on after being misunderstood or accepted. And I want to know more about that experience and how that release was for the process for your journey.
I think one of the more meaningful releases was, this was a ghost of a man who was in a building that he had lived in. And he was not the nicest guy. He was what we might call a sexist, right? Misogynist. And the women who lived in the building were not super thrilled, because he would show up in the bathroom mirror, or like at the end of their bed, places where, quite honestly, he didn't belong. And when I was called into the space, it didn't take long to figure out who he was and that he had lived in the building. And even better, they still had historic items in there that had been his. Chairs, things like that were old and beautiful, like beautiful antiques. Maybe some had been reupholstered, but they were still there and they were still holding on to him. And they gave him a key into the place. And through the interactions with him, it was kind of determined that he felt like he didn't want to necessarily cross over and move on because he was afraid he'd run into his mother again. And got to work with a medium on this as well. The medium was kind of like, well, your mother doesn't understand what you're doing here with these ladies. She's like, you need to leave them alone. You need to come through and leave your home. Like, he'd had a lot of pride in this particular house. He'd worked very hard to earn it. But, the girls there, the roommates, they were just not thrilled to have him, being a peeping Tom ghost, basically. I don't want to terrify your listeners, by the way. This is not a usual situation. This is very unusual, very strange. And finally, the medium convinced him to just try to walk towards his mother, to try to just walk towards her and accept that she was ready to receive him with grace. And you could almost feel the air change in the room immediately. It was kind of like, oh, he's gone. And I have checked it several times with the women. They're like, it feels totally different. Their animals are happier. Their plants are growing better. They did sell off the furniture that was his. But that said, he's completely gone from the space. I did suggest to them, you might want to smoke cleanse or get some essential oils, just some other things to kind of clear out his energy and mark it as your own. And they did do all of those things. And you could literally feel the change, though. When it happened, the peace that came over everyone in the room, it was like you could suddenly be like, oh.
Yeah.
The tension that existed immediately when we walked in the door wasn't there. It was just gone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think those are things that they're so subtle that if we're not connected deeply within ourselves, it's really hard to have a connection and really sensing what's going on around us. I think that is the entryway to understanding and sensing that stuff. But I think it's fabulous because it doesn't apply just to the spirit world, to the energy shifting in a home, but it applies in your body, what you're putting in your body, the thoughts, what you're putting in your space, where you purchase things, if you're setting it as your own, like you said. So that's like a whole nother episode we could talk about space clearing, because I know you also love and are passionate about that. But I'd love to hear these stories of spirits being able to move on. And then, of course, the living and the past are having reconciliation for all that. So I know that our listeners out there are local and international. So do you have any ghost story just from our region, or maybe somewhere in the diversity? Yeah. In the paranormal experiences. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Let's see. I'll start with one from Florida. And this is in a very fancy hotel called the Don Cesar. And I have a friend who stayed there.
I know where that is.
Yes. It's called the Pink Palace.
Yes.
And obviously I don't have visuals here, but it is a breathtaking building, and it was built to honor a woman named Lucinda. So there was a man, Mr. Rao, and he grew up and went to school in London. So he was originally from the United States, and he was educated in London, and he fell wildly in love with an opera singer named Lucinda. And they met by this fountain night after night, the lovers. And he's like, at the end of the show, marry me and we'll be together. Well, he wasn't yet who he was going to become. And he wasn't a rich, fabulous hotel owner yet. And her parents were like, no, you're coming back to Italy with us, and this guy is out the door. So right after the last show, before he could get her and they could elope, her parents swept her away back to Italy. And sadly, he never saw her again. So his heart was absolutely broken. He did try to marry later. It ended up very quickly in a divorce. And he could just never forget her. Years later, he received a letter from her parents saying that she also never forgot him. But tragically, she had died of an illness. And he wanted to make a place where when he died, they would be together forever. So he built the Don Cesar Hotel, the Pink Palace. right? A tribute to a woman is this big, beautiful hotel. It opened in 1928. Thomas Rao was his name, and he recreated the fountain. He recreated the fountain in the Don Cesar so that they could stay together. And people from in the past 100 years or so have reported this hotel is still there for your listeners. You could vacation there. If you're in Florida, you could go there right now. It's in St. Pete's Beach. You still see the two of them there. Shirley, her ghost appeared as soon as the fountain was done, and people for decades have reported seeing her walk around. She has got very long dark hair. They say she's quite beautiful. And then upon his passing, when Thomas Rowell died, they started to see his ghost there as well. But they say they're not the only ones. F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda have been seen dancing in the ballroom. They did indeed visit this place. It was also used during World War II as an army hospital, and there have been soldiers' ghosts there as well. So the place itself, the Don Cesar Hotel, it now has like a day spa and all the fancy stuff that you would want from a high-end hotel. But it is still a pink palace. It does look like it belongs in the Barbie movie, and the ghosts there are definitely part of the landscape. They're kind of embraced by the hotel. I guess maybe because Thomas Rowell and Lucinda are the reason it exists.
Oh my gosh, I love that story. I cannot wait to tell my mom that story. Reddington Beach, St. Pete's Beach is where we always go. That's like our
so you've been there. That's amazing.
Yeah. And so I knew exactly what you were talking about when you said that. That's really cool.
So I could do another local love story, and this one is not as happy. Here in York County, towards the Susquehanna River, which is like a hotbed for paranormal activity, there is a place called the Accomack Inn, and it has a fantastic history. It was part of the ferry system when all the different wars have come, like Marquis de Lafayette came through there. The first steamboat in America was launched from the Accomack Inn's wharf. It's got a great chunk of history and Americana to it. So there was a family there, and the Coyle family. They had a son named John Jr. Johnny was a great riverman, but he was not a super great guy. They say he had a really bad temper. He would fly off the handle at a moment's notice. But he also was the heir to the Accomack Inn and a great riverman and quite a catch if you were a woman back in this time. But Emily didn't think so. She knew Johnny very well. She was an orphan who worked at the Accomack Inn. Now, if you think back for a moment into this time period, we're looking at like late 1800s. It would have been amazing for a woman who was an orphan to marry this man, because she would not have had a dowry. She would not have had parents to give her a husband. That was all required historically for a woman to get married. That said, Johnny wanted to marry her. He asked her over and over, and she always said no, because he had this really bad temper. Well, one day he asked her, and she said no again. And he decided that if he couldn't have her, nobody else would. So he walked out to the barn and he shot her. And then he turned the gun on himself, but he didn't die. He was wounded, and he ran off into the woods. He was found a few days later. They nursed him back to health and charged him with murder. His parents had so much influence that they got the trial moved to Adams County. But he was still accused of first-degree murder because he shot this woman in cold blood. He was hanged and buried at the Accomack Inn. His grave is still there. You can see it from the road. It is private property, so I don't encourage your listeners to go tromping around. But you can see his grave from the road, and the house itself is beautiful. Some of it is still original, but it's been restored many, many times. So that said, Emily and Johnny both haunt the Accomack. I have heard of dozens of accounts. You can actually go on YouTube, and one of the investigation groups recorded Emily saying, "Help me." So here's this woman who didn't want to marry this man, somehow stuck with him forever. Forever. Both of their spirits, as far as I know, are still there. Now, the building was just very recently purchased. It hasn't been reopened as anything yet, but somebody bought it just in the past few months. It was empty. It was empty for like 7 or 8 years. It just sat there. Yeah. So it's kind of sad, but so many of the staff, previous patrons have all reported seeing, hearing, sensing Johnny and Emily. There are other ghosts there too. There's a cat ghost. People say that you could see it jump up on a table and literally knock something down and then go about its cat business. So they have a naughty cat, I guess, at the Accomack Inn. Cats, animal spirits are fascinating to me. Like, why would they choose to stick around? Is this just a place they like to be? But they have a cat ghost there that does cat stuff. They have the ghost of a Confederate soldier there who was a traitor and was trying to abscond from the army and got shot, and his body was left there. So there's all kinds of fascinating stories around the Accomack, but Johnny and Emily is kind of the ultimate ghost story tragedy. You know, she didn't want to be with him in life and ended up with him in the afterlife for at least 100 years now, maybe more.
Yeah. Yeah. My sister used to work at the Accomack when they had, it was a restaurant, and she's not necessarily open into the spirit stuff, but she definitely said that there was stuff happening there. And I was like, oh yeah. Well, so wrapping up here, I would love to hear maybe two things from you. So if there are listeners that maybe are just starting out in this and kind of a little bit wary, what advice do you have for anyone approaching experiences like this with openness rather than fear? And can you then tell us a little bit about your ghost tours and storytelling YouTube channel?
Yes. So if you're approaching this, my best advice is not to believe media. My best advice is, even if you love scary movies and you love Halloween, first of all, ghosts are a year-round thing. They don't just appear on October 31st. That is simply about a bill of goods you've been sold. Is to approach it with the same kind of openness that you would approach meeting anybody else. Understand that they're probably doing their best to communicate with you, and just sometimes patience and empathy are required. Just like with anybody else that you meet, patience and empathy are always a good policy. And I do have a channel. It's called Listen to Me in the Dark. And yes, it's supposed to be cheeky because everybody likes to hear a ghost story around a campfire or a fireplace. I'm no exception. My ghost story life started on Halloween night with my dad in the dark driving around, right? But that said, I collect local stories and I condense them into micro stories. So each one is less than a minute, and they are all stories that I've collected from real people. And I usually list the place, but I don't ever list the person's name. So I collect them anonymously. They're all from Pennsylvania, and they are all real. They were real to the person who experienced them.
I love that. I love it. So can you tell us about your ghost tours as well?
Absolutely. My website is hauntedpa.online, which is a new kind of website, right? But I do ghost tours in York, PA, and I run them April through November, mostly on Fridays and Saturday nights. I do have one ASL friendly tour coming up in October. And we do have some special nights, like coming up soon. I have one that I'm bringing along, a paranormal investigator who will talk as well as me about some of the buildings and equipment that they use. We're overlapping with the downtown zombie walk. So we're going to have a zombie night. So I try to do some special things. I also do a girls' night out ghost tour, which is a totally different program. I tell women's history from the town as well as about the female hauntings specifically. So all the way tours are on my website, and people are welcome. Travel, stay at the Yorktown, and go to Firefly Hollow, get a massage, and then come for a walk with me in the dark.
Absolutely. Awesome. And I know that for those of you, again, listening, if you have any other questions too, reach out to Rissa on social media, check her website out, check out our YouTube channel. I will share all the information in the show notes. And thank you so much again, Rissa. I always love chatting, so much information. Thank you guys out there for listening, and be well until next time, my friends. Have a happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Thank you for listening to the Mind Body Detox Podcast. If you love this podcast, share it with others and leave us a review. Your reviews help us more than you know and supports us continuing to make episodes and being heard from all over the world. You can also follow the link in our show notes to submit a topic that you would like to hear on the show.